leadership is pretty popular in Christian circles. I mean, in some sense, what I got from it, kind of in my youth as a Christian, was that every Christian was supposed to be a leader. And I wonder if you might comment on what it's like to have a room full of leaders, and how humility can facilitate a process by which all of these people, which are geared toward influence and leadership, they might actually operate as a group. What do you think about leaders interacting together?
Yeah. So often it depends on what Liz alluded to a little while ago, and that is your understanding of leadership. If it's servant leadership, if everybody has that attitude, leaders operating together can be a very effective tool. If, on the other hand, it's a power struggle, then of course it's very ineffective. So I think we have to investigate and think about, well, really what is leadership and what is my motive for being a leader? Yeah. I think that's so important. And if it's just to exert influence or to exert power to get my way, to try to convince other people that I and perhaps I alone am right, then that's a recipe for problems in the church or in any organization.
Yeah. It sounds then that your conception of humility can have a really deep impact on your conception of leadership and how you go about trying to lead.
Absolutely.
Okay. Liz, you've been looking also at some studies where you were looking at a nationally representative sample of U.S. pastors and comparing them to other people and thinking about their intellectual humility with respect to others. So are pastors more or less intellectually humble than other people?
So that project was actually a Barna Research Group project where they collected this great sample, nationally representative sample of U.S. pastors, where they looked up all of the churches with addresses or email addresses or phone numbers, and then also got a random digit dial sample of U.S. Adults. And then they used a few of the items on a scale of intellectual humility that I had developed. And so we don't have overall scores for intellectual humility because they didn't use the whole scale, but they were just looking at, on those items, how do pastors respond compared to the general population? And for the most part, pastors were on par or even were expressing slightly more intellectual humility than the general population. The item that stood out most where they were expressing intellectual humility compared to others was one about their willingness to change their minds when warranted. So pastors seem to be expressing, when it comes down to it, I am willing to change my mind when I realize I've been wrong. But then on the other hand, the item where pastors really were expressing a lot less intellectual humility than the general population was an item about, the statement was, when I'm really confident in a belief, there's very little chance that I'm wrong. And so where 44% of the general population agreed with that statement, 69% of pastors were agreeing with that statement. So this idea that, well, when I am really confident, then I'm probably not wrong. And so some people say, well, isn't that the case? Like, doesn't my confidence relate to how likely I am to be right? But what we know from research in general is that that's not the case. So there's a weak to non-existent relationship between how confident we feel about something and how right we are about that thing.
And we've seen very sad and tragic examples of the contrary.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think what we can realize, what can be helpful for religious leaders and for all of us, is that that's a cognitive bias to which we're all prone as individuals. And so it's not that we can even get rid of that cognitive bias necessarily, but just being aware of that cognitive bias. So when I feel really confident or really sure about something, just to be aware that doesn't mean that I'm right. I could still be wrong. That can be a really helpful tool for religious leaders and for all of us. I know for me, it helps me in my marriage, right? When I'm having an argument with my husband and I feel like I'm sure that this is the case, to just realize, well, the science says that doesn't mean that I'm right. I could be completely wrong. And even things like eyewitness testimony. I mean, we know that even when people are really sure about what they saw, they're often wrong. And so it's not very reliable at all. And so, that's hard sometimes to get across to a jury who thinks, oh, this person is saying they saw this, so it has to be true. We all fall into that bias. And so awareness, I think, is the key there.
I'm going to have to try that, bringing some scientific data to my next argument with my wife.
Good luck.